Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest Worth Publishers TLC Symposium series, The Pain of Rejection, The Sweet and Bitter of Relationships, featuring C. Nathan DeWall from University of Kentucky. Thank you so much for coming. Before we get started, just wanted to go over a few housekeeping issues. First of all, if you would like to ask a question, we will be taking questions at the end of the session, but you could type your questions at any point in the chat box. I will be collecting your questions. If you do not see the chat box once the presentation gets started, you can hover over the top of your screen, and there will be a green bar and an icon for chat, and this will bring up this particular box. And we are really so lucky to have Dr. DeWall here today. Dr. DeWall is an associate professor of psychology and a faculty co-director of Arts and Sciences Wired at the University of Kentucky. With Dr. David Myers, Nathan is the new co-author of a new column in the American Psychological Association magazine, Observer, a column on integrating cutting-edge psychological science into the classroom. He is also the new co-author on David Myers' introductory psychology textbooks. Dr. DeWall has three interconnected research programs: how people respond to social acceptance and rejection, self-control, and aggression. So you can see why he is the perfect person to give this talk. I'm now going to hand over the reins to Dr. DeWall so he could start his presentation.
Great. Well, Andrea, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to everyone who is here for the webinar. For wherever you're at, it's great to be talking and to be sharing with you some of the research that my colleagues and I have been doing over about the past decade on how people relate to others, and specifically what happens when our relationships go awry, when people feel lonely, ostracized, excluded, or rejected. And so we're really just going to cover three different things today. We're going to look at some of the inner processes that social exclusion affects. We're going to talk about whether the pain of rejection is real or if it's just a metaphor. And finally, we're going to talk about whether or not people who feel rejected have a desire to reconnect. But before we get...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you showing your PowerPoints at this time?
Yeah.
Okay, you have to click Share My Desktop on the WebEx because they're not currently showing up for the attendees.
Okay, no problem. And I've got, I don't see where I can, Andrea, can you show me where that might be to share my desktop?
If you go down, if you choose the blue and green ball at the bottom of the screen, it will bring up the whole WebEx window. And if the tab isn't already displaying Quick Start, make sure it's displaying Quick Start and then click Share My Desktop.
Okay. And I really do apologize. I just don't see that. Manage panels.
It's in the left part of the screen.
Okay. Oh, Quick Start. There we go. There we go. All right. All right. So can you see my slide?
Not yet. It looks like it's loading. I see a blank white screen.
Okay. and you should see it now.
I do. I see it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. I apologize. All right. So, as I said, we're gonna talk about these three different questions. But before we get there, I want to ask you about something. I want you to think for a moment. What's the most extreme thing you've ever done to be accepted into a group or by another person? Now, for most of you who are listening, you're time traveling. You're thinking back in time to maybe high school, college, maybe when you first got your job, maybe a recent conference that you've attended, or a manuscript that you've been writing and you've been working very hard on it and trying to get that paper accepted for publication. Now, all of us do these sorts of things, and I asked the same question to some of the students who work in my laboratory, and I got some really interesting answers, all of which really demonstrate that people will go to any lengths to gain a sense of social acceptance. Now, here's the first example. So this student said, when I was getting initiated into the cheerleading team, I volunteered to be dropped off in an open field in the middle of the night and had to find my way back. They also told us that there was a murderer on the loose around that area. So here we have someone who placed themselves in harm's way just so that they could be accepted into a group. Here's another student who said, I spent an entire year being mean to a girl that really had nothing wrong with her. I did it so my supposed friends wouldn't make fun of me instead. So here we have an example of a person who was mean to someone, and they knew that the other person didn't deserve it, but they did it so that they could gain inclusion into a group. But my favorite is this one. This student said, I became friends with some girls that I thought were cool. The most popular girl invited me over to her house and told me to trim up the back of her hair. She thought the best idea was to just shave her head, so she says, I'll only do it if you do, let's do it. So what do you think happened? She said, in seconds, my hair was gone. Now, this student said that she did this during the second semester of her senior year of high school, and it caused her father to call her the son he never had. So you got to ask yourself why. Why do these sorts of things happen? And I think really what they demonstrate is the power of our need for positive and lasting relationships. Now, this need to belong is deeply rooted in our evolutionary history and has all sorts of consequences for modern psychological processes. People satisfy their need to belong in lots of different ways, whether it's trying to find a romantic partner, spending time with your partner, doing things that are romantic with your partner. But a lot of these things, sometimes they don't pan out, and we experience social rejection. So a lot of times when I talk to people about rejection, sometimes people say, you know, Nathan, I've never experienced rejection. But one thing that we know is that rejection is actually a fairly common occurrence. When people think about the rejection that they've experienced, a lot of times it's those very strong, impactful instances of rejection, like a romantic breakup that they think about. But almost every day, people report feeling left out, ostracized, or excluded. And so if the need to belong is so deeply ingrained in our human psyche as a basic motivation, well, when you thwart that need to belong through social rejection, it should have profound consequences for how people think, how they feel, and how they behave. And so some of the methods that we're going to use in the studies I'll talk about today we use experiments. And so in the first experiment, or the first paradigm we use, we have people come into a laboratory in groups, and they get to know each other. These are all strangers, about 4 to 6 people. They get to know each other's names, some information about each other. Then we put them into separate rooms. Next, what we do is we come back and we tell people what we want you to do is we want you to write down the names of the 2 people that you like the most and you want to work with on an upcoming partner task. About 5 minutes later, the experimenter comes back and by the flip of a coin tells half the participants, what happened this time is nobody picked you. So because nobody picked you, I can't get the groups together like I normally would, and so you're going to have to spend the rest of the hour alone in this room. So everyone's debriefed at the end of the study. They're told the true purpose of the study, but at this point in the experiment, these participants are made to feel rejected. The other half of the participants are told the opposite. They're told everybody picked them. And because everybody picked them, I can't get the groups together like I normally would. And so you have to spend the rest of the hour alone in the room. So everyone ends up alone in that room by themselves, but only half of them are there because nobody else wants to be there with them. Another paradigm that we use, instead of having people come into the lab in groups, they come individually and they complete a personality test. And they receive feedback on that personality test that indicates that they have a personality type where they're probably going to be very lonely in the future. Or other participants are told that they're going to have a future that's filled with lots of positive relationships, or they're going to have a future that's not going to be very pleasant. They might experience a lot of accidents or physical injuries, but it's unrelated to their relationships. Another manipulation we use, participants trade messages back and forth through videos with a partner. And the partner is actually a confederate who works for us, the experimenter. They trade messages back and forth, and then for half the participants, they're told, well, I don't know what happened, but your partner doesn't want to meet with you. The other half of the participants are told that they aren't going to be able to meet with their partner, but it's just because their partner had an appointment that they forgot to go to. So again, everyone in this experiment is excluded, but only half of them are excluded for personal reasons. And then the final manipulation that we use is a virtual ball tossing task called cyberball. So we conducted many different studies over several years, and very consistently we found that when people feel rejected, even in these very minor impersonal experiences of rejection by a group of strangers or in a ball tossing task, that it produced very strong behavioral responses. People became less helpful, they became more aggressive, more self-defeating, they would procrastinate more, all of these sorts of indicators. But the mystery is what sort of inner processes were involved. Initially, we thought that a lot of these behavioral effects would be due to people getting extremely upset at the prospect of rejection, but we didn't really find a lot of evidence for that. When participants did report feeling upset, that distress didn't relate to how they were actually acting. So what we proposed is that self-regulation might be an inner process that social exclusions that affects. And so it's as if there's this implicit bargain that exists between individuals and society. And the bargain states that I'm going to go through the pain of controlling my behavior, of overriding my selfish impulses. And by doing that, I'm granted the benefits of social inclusion. But what happens when people experience social rejection, when people are excluded? It represents a breakdown in this bargain. So no matter what I do, no matter how much I control my impulses, I'm not going to gain those benefits. And as a result, people should be less willing to control their impulses. So I'm just going to show you a couple of studies that we used to test this hypothesis. And the first one, what we did was we brought participants into the lab. We brought them through that group rejection manipulation. Now, this is the one where they get to meet a bunch of strangers, and then half of the participants are told, none of these people want to work with you, versus everybody wants to work with you. And remember how all of the participants end up in that room alone? Well, this is where we brought in the main measure of the study. So participants were told, since you're going to be in the room for the rest of the hour by yourself, we need you to do something. And so we're doing a taste testing study. And so the experimenter gave them a bowl of cookies and simply told them, we want you to eat as many of these cookies as you need to understand what the cookies taste like, their dryness, their texture, things like that. Now, college students love chocolate chip cookies, and they also know they shouldn't be eating them. So what we hypothesized is that people who are rejected, they would be less willing to control their impulses, and they would eat more cookies. So what we found is that participants who were told everybody picked them, they ate about 4 of these cookies. So that's a lot of cookies to eat to understand what they taste like. But among participants who were told nobody picked you, they ate over twice as many. So next what we wanted to do is we wanted to replicate this and extend it in a different way. And so instead of resisting tempting food, I think a lot of times we're confronted with situations where we have to override our impulse to do something that's unpleasant, but that's healthy for us. So a lot of times when we have to take medicine, sometimes it doesn't taste very good, but it's going to be good for our health. We wanted to replicate that experience in the lab. And so what we did was we brought participants through an exclusion manipulation, and then we gave them some Kool-Aid to drink. But the key here is that we didn't follow the instructions very well. Instead of putting sugar in the Kool-Aid, we put vinegar. And we told participants, this is vinegar drink. Vinegar is very good for you. People put it in their salads all the time. And so what we want you to do is to drink as many ounces of this vinegar drink as you want to, and we'll pay you a nickel for every ounce that you drink. And every ounce was in a 1-ounce shot glass. So participants in the control conditions, they drank about 7.5 ounces of the vinegar Kool-Aid, but excluded participants drank significantly less. Again, showing us that excluded people become less willing to control their impulses. But because this is a willingness and a reduced willingness to control one's impulses, one way that we can reduce these deficits is through motivation. And what we've shown is that one way that we can reduce them is to link self-control performance to the opportunity to gain friends. Excluded people are really motivated to do that. And also, if you offer excluded people money for doing well, it also offsets these deficits. So this is promising. What it shows is that one inner process that's involved when people experience rejection is self-regulation. But another thing that's promising here is that we can reverse these effects. We can eliminate these deficits by motivating people in different ways. So now let's talk about the pain of rejection. So a lot of times when people talk about social rejection, they are using words that are related to physical pain. They might say, I feel hurt, I feel crushed, I feel brokenhearted. Now, at a linguistic level, there's this similarity, and it's not unique to the English language. In really every known language, there is this overlap linguistically. At a behavioral level, there's also overlap. So when you expose people to physical pain, they behave more aggressively. And when people experience social pain, like the pain of rejection, they also behave aggressively. But I think the most compelling evidence is the neurobiological evidence that shows that instead of creating an entirely new system to respond to socially painful events like rejection, evolution simply co-opted or piggybacked the existing system for physical pain onto social pain. So if this is true, then if we numb people to one type of pain, it should numb them to the other type of pain. So if I give you a physical painkiller, this might numb you to the pain of social rejection. So we tested this in a couple of studies. In the first one, all that we did, it was very simple. So participants were randomly assigned to take placebo pills or acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient in Tylenol. They took a morning dose and an evening dose. And at the end of the day, they reported how much they had their feelings hurt that day. Now, Mark Leary has done some great work on sort of the emotional response to rejection, and he's shown that hurt feelings are really the core emotional marker. So on the first day of the study, we didn't find any differences between the placebo and the drug condition. And among participants who took the placebo pills, they didn't show any differences in their hurt feelings. But among participants who took acetaminophen, a physical painkiller, they showed a gradual reduction in hurt feelings over time. But we weren't satisfied with this. We wanted to find some additional evidence. And we wanted to see if we could find evidence for this, not only in people's daily experiences, but also in terms of the neural activation that they show in response to rejection. So we ran a very similar study. So we randomly assigned people to take acetaminophen or a placebo pill. And then we invited them to our imaging facility at the University of Kentucky. And we told them that they were completing a virtual ball tossing task with 2 other people. In the first round, it looked like this. So they got the ball an equal number of times, and they were sitting in the scanner, and they had button boxes, and the button box would allow them to throw the ball back and forth to each of their virtual partners. And they did this for about 3.5 minutes. So they experienced social inclusion. Next, participants completed a second round of the game against the same 2 people, but it looked different, and the experience was different. This is what it looked like. So as you can see, participants felt ostracized. This was the rejection manipulation. And so what we did during this entire time was we recorded their brain activity. And what we predicted is that for participants who took the placebo pills, that they would show greater activation in brain regions that are associated with physical pain, like the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. And previous research has shown that these are activations, these are regions that are activated when people experience social exclusion. But another thing that we expected is that this effect would be significantly reduced among participants who took acetaminophen. And that's exactly what we find. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we show activation in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, and on the right, the anterior insula. So as we had expected, participants who took acetaminophen showed significantly less activation in these pain regions in response to the pain of social rejection compared to people who took placebo pills. Next, what we wanted to do is we wanted to see if this would extend to other drugs, specifically other drugs that acted through similar mechanisms as acetaminophen. So acetaminophen is the most commonly used drug in the United States. It's extremely safe. It's in lots of different things. But until recently, people didn't really know how it worked. That is, what sort of mechanisms it acted through. And so they've identified there's some initial evidence that suggests that the active sort of acetaminophen has its effect as it acts through cannabinoid-1 receptors, which are the same receptors that give marijuana its effects. So we just ran, we did a series of studies to see if we would show a similar numbness to the pain of rejection among people who were smoking marijuana frequently. So in our first study, we used the National Comorbidity Survey replication data set, and this is a nationally representative sample of American adults, and they reported their levels of loneliness, their marijuana use, and also their level of depression. Among participants who weren't smoking marijuana frequently, there is a positive association between loneliness and depression, as you would expect, but it was significantly reduced among participants who smoked marijuana frequently. Next, what we wanted to do is we wanted to replicate and extend this in a longitudinal design, and instead of using a national representative sample of adults, we wanted to use a younger sample, high school students. And so what we did was we measured participants' loneliness today and their depression today and their lifetime marijuana use, which these are young kids, so a lot of them hadn't smoked marijuana ever. Some had smoked some marijuana. Very few had smoked marijuana very, very frequently. And then a year later, we also asked them how depressed they were. So among participants who didn't smoke marijuana very frequently, again, we find this positive relationship. The more lonely you are, the more depressed you are a year from now, controlling for how depressed you were a year ago. But among participants who smoked marijuana frequently, this association is statistically flat. People aren't that slope isn't significantly negative. It's statistically flat. So really, what we're showing here again is a buffering effect of marijuana use on depression as a function of loneliness, and we're showing it in a longitudinal design. And finally, we did a study using cyberball, where we actually, instead of manipulating or measuring loneliness, we manipulated it. And so participants were randomly assigned to experience ostracism or inclusion. We got measures of their marijuana use, and then they reported their threatened needs. So how much in response to the cyberball, rejection, or inclusion, they experienced threatened self-esteem, feelings of control, meaningful existence, and mood. And as we expected, there's this positive relationship between being rejected and having threatened needs. It's still positive among participants who are smoking marijuana frequently, but it's not as strong. So another thing that we wanted to do to see sort of how can you sort of buffer people from the effects of exclusion? Well, can you use electricity to do this? That is, can you stimulate brain regions that are implicated in downregulating upsetting situations, like the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex? So we wanted to see if we could do this, and to do it, we used a technique called transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS. And this is what it looks like. So participants came into the lab, they put on this headband, and then what we were able to do is we could put electrodes on different portions of the scalp that would enable us to stimulate the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex or not. And so for participants, half the participants got the activation, and the other half of the participants were in our sham condition. So they thought that, so we turned the machine on at the beginning and at the end of the study, but it turned off in between. So they didn't know if they were getting it or not. During, between the beginning and the end of the study, participants completed cyberball, and they were either excluded or accepted while they played. Afterward, participants completed the hurt feeling scale. So as we had expected, among participants who were in the control condition, these are participants we did not stimulate this sort of affect regulation component of the brain. There's this positive relationship, again, between feeling excluded and experiencing hurt feelings. But when we stimulated this brain region, we effectively eliminated the effect of exclusion on higher levels of hurt feelings. Now, we published this paper last year in Psychological Science, and now what we're doing is we're trying to extend it to see if we can reduce the relationship between social exclusion and aggressive behavior. And our findings suggest that we can. So we've talked about self-regulation failure, about the pain of rejection, and now let's end on a positive note. Do rejected people, do they have a motivation to reconnect with others? Now, the need to belong is a motivation, and so because of that, it should operate like many other motivations. When there is deprivation, it should motivate people to restore themselves to normal or desirable levels of where they should be at. So in a lot of these studies, when rejected people are behaving aggressively, when they're engaging in selfish behavior, in a lot of those studies, rejected people aren't actually, given opportunities to reconnect with others. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to run some studies to see if you gave rejected people these opportunities, would their behavior change? Would they become nicer? Would they want to put on a good impression so that they could sort of regain a sense of belonging in their lives? So to do this, what we used was the partner rejection manipulation. Now, this is the one that I talked about at the very beginning of the talk, where people traded video messages back and forth with a confederate, and then half of them were told, this person refuses to work with you, or this person is going to have to leave early and you're not going to be able to meet them. Next, participants were told that there was a new partner here that they were going to meet. And before they met this new person, they were going to rate a drawing that this person did for a study that they were participating in. And we gave participants $5 in quarters. And we told participants for each point of creativity that you rate, give your partner a quarter. But for every, and you can give them as much or as little as you want to, but whatever you don't give your partner, you're going to have an opportunity to win yourself. So we predicted that rejected people would want to make a good impression for this new person, and so they would give more money. So for participants in the control condition, they did about a 50-50 split, which is fair. It's about what you would expect. But rejected people gave a little bit more. They weren't giving everything, but they were giving more than people in the control conditions. Next, what we wanted to do is we wanted to see if we would find signs of this motivation to reconnect at sort of early stage cognitive processes, like looking at people's eye movements. So we ran a study, or a series of studies, where we exposed participants to a rejection manipulation, and then we put an eye tracker on them. And this is what the eye tracker looked like. So if you see that black piece over the person who's sitting over his eye, there's a little camera in there that reflects down onto that mirror that goes back onto their eye. And what you can see, as you can see on that screen, is the big circle is the person's pupil, and the smaller circle underneath is their corneal reflection. And you can calibrate that so you know where those things are, and then you can simply hit the recording button, and then you can record where their eye is going on the computer screen. And what we showed participants were arrays of faces, groups of faces that differed in their facial expression. And we predicted that rejected people who were motivated to find new friends, that their eyes would be directed towards signs of acceptance, like smiling faces. And that's precisely what we find. So compared to participants who are in the control conditions, and the control conditions did not differ from each other in this study, it was, you're going to have a future that's filled with lots of relationships, or just sort of a no feedback control condition. They didn't differ from each other, so we just collapsed them. That socially excluded people are paying more attention. Their eyes are captured more by smiling faces than among control participants. Another thing that we found is that these effects seem to be unique to signs of social acceptance. So if you show people pleasant pictures like this one of landscapes, in fact these pictures are rated as equally positive as a smiling face, but participants who are rejected don't necessarily see these pictures as more compelling than a smiling face. So it does seem to be specific to the motivation. Next, what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at sort of this desire for affiliation among rejected people, and we wanted to sort of go from brain to behavior, to trace and relate these neural activations to rejection that we've been finding to behavioral measures that would relate to a desire to reconnect. And so we ran a study where, again, we used Cyberball, and participants came to our imaging facility, and they were included and then excluded, and then they hopped out of the scanner, and then we told them that they were going to have an interaction with one of their Cyberball partners. And we showed them, this is a chair, and this is where your partner is going to sit, and here's your chair, and you can scoot it wherever you want to, and we'll be back and we'll get your partner. And what we predicted is that, in this chair proximity test, which has been used in previous research, that the closer that people sit to to the other person, the closer they scoot their chair, the greater desire they have to affiliate with this other person. So we predicted that rejected people, to the extent that they showed greater pain activation in those pain regions, that they would scoot their chair up closer to their partner. And as you can see, that's precisely what we find. So we find greater activation, again, in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the left and right anterior insula. And as you can see, the closer I scoot my chair is correlated with greater activation in those regions. So the more pain that I experience from rejection, the greater the desire for affiliation I have. So we've covered a lot of ground today in the past half hour. So we've talked about an inner process that's involved in social exclusion. We've talked about the pain of rejection. Now we've shown some indicators of how people are motivated to reconnect with potential affiliates. Some future directions that we're taking this, we're looking at how we can extend our work beyond strangers to people who are in ongoing relationships. A lot of times people report feeling ignored or neglected by their partner, and one thing that we're showing is that feeling rejected by your partner is also something that's associated with greater aggression. We're looking at other types of discomfort, and specifically things like discomfort that comes in the wake of financial decisions that people make, like loss aversion. And so we're sort of looking at if we can use similar interventions that we can use to reduce the pain of exclusion. Can we also sort of numb people to loss aversion if we give them, for example, acetaminophen? The same thing goes for things like how it hurts to spend cash money more than it hurts to use a credit card. There's this effect called the pain of pain, which suggests that one reason why people spend less money when they're using cash is because psychologically it hurts more. Well, one thing that we're looking at now is whether or not you can sort of eliminate this pain or reduce it through similar pharmacological interventions that we use to reduce the pain of rejection. So I want to thank my lab for doing these studies, and again, I really want to thank you for being here, for listening, and to Andrea and the folks at Worth Publishers for inviting me to give this webinar. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. DeWall. This was an amazing webinar. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your research with us. And, of course, we do have a few questions that we hope you can answer.
Great.
The first one is, what specific interventions can you recommend for community clinics serving the homeless population who have huge social ostracism, difficulty managing health issues, and longer-term systemic responses to their social environment, learned helplessness?
Wow.
Medical and psychotherapeutic interventions are both appreciated, as well as population-based approaches.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that, so what interventions can we use to sort of reduce a lot of these, sort of the pain of rejection among people who are rejected by society, it sounds like, is sort of the broader question for this. And, I think that, one thing that we've found is that a lot of these effects, are extremely powerful. They affect people in lots of different ways. But they're also extremely easy to eliminate, and you don't have to, I've been talking about using, drug treatments to do that. But I think the easiest and probably the most effective way to do this is to institute programs where people are put in contact with others who represent, actual relationship partners, actual people who care about you. And I think a lot of organizations, this is why they're so effective, is they give people who feel marginalized or ostracized a feeling of hope and connection. And so any sort of intervention that we can use that would first and foremost give people a sense of belonging and connectedness, I think is going to go a long ways. And it's going to, it's going to help. I mean, we know that it's going to help people in terms of their physical health, their mental health, their relational well-being, and it's going to make them better members of society. And so I think, that's, having mentorship programs where people, a big thing is just having regular contact with people who genuinely care about you. It sounds very simple, but the science suggests that might be the most effective way to sort of offset some of these difficulties.
Great, thank you so much. The next question I have is, to what extent do responses to ostracism reflect the operation of self-regulatory processes that are involved with self-threats such as negative performance feedback or even mundane problems such as running out of time to complete a task?
Okay, so how much of these problems, okay, I'm sorry, there's a lot in there. So how much of the problems that we're finding are they due to self-regulation failure? Is that sounds like the big question, right?
Right, that sounds right.
Okay, and I think my understanding is that I think that's a very, very big component. When you look at a lot of these sort of negative consequences of social rejection, they're really lapses in self-regulation. When people are, withdrawing from others, when they're overeating, when they're behaving aggressively, when they're behaving selfishly, they're not really motivated to override their impulses that say, take care of me first before I act appropriately around other people. And so I think that's a common thread through this line of work. And so the thing that goes into this is, well, if that's a central mechanism, then how can we increase people's self-control? And I think one way that you can do that is giving people, educating people about what happens if they lash out at others when they've been rejected, and sort of teaching them how to approach instances of social rejection differently. But you can also look at the self-regulation literature, and there are lots of ways that you can improve people's self-control using very simple, powerful, and really short interventions. And so that's a line of work that my colleagues and I are pursuing right now. So that's a very good question.
Thank you so much. And as a reminder to everybody, if you would like to ask a question and you don't see the chat box, if you hover over the top of the screen, you should see a green bar, and when you hover over it, it opens up a larger toolbar, and there's an icon that says chat. And if you click that, you will be able to type your questions in, and I will ask them to Nathan. The next question I have is, are there certain personality types, for example, Myers-Briggs, that experience social rejection more frequently?
That experience rejection more frequently? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think one thing that we know is that depressed people experience rejection very frequently. So, going back to Jim Coyne's work from, the 1970s, where he gave people opportunities to have, like a 1-minute phone conversation with someone who's depressed and someone who isn't depressed. And, the depressed people were getting rejected a lot more frequently. We also know we have, really good indicators of sort of other factors that will lead people to experience rejection down the road. So whereas depressed people are often rejected initially, people who are narcissistic, who have sort of inflated, grandiose self-images. Initially, they are very fun to be around, and people kind of want to be their friends and get in relationships with them, but oftentimes they end up getting rejected because people really can't stand to be around them anymore. And we also find that, narcissists, I think, when they get rejected, they get a lot angrier, they behave more aggressively, and one thing that we're also showing is that you can really, a lot of this stuff originates in sort of stronger responses in the brain to social rejection among narcissists. With some other factors, so I see, one person asked about extroverts and introverts, and are there differences between those two in terms of how they cope with rejection? And we haven't found any differences between extroverts and introverts. They both seem to experience it in the same way. So there are a few sort of moderators of these effects, but they're kind of hard to come by. And I think one reason for that is rejection poses such a strong threat to all of us that it can be kind of difficult to find certain pockets of people who are affected more than others.
Okay, thank you. Have you studied the correlation between self-esteem and response to rejection?
I haven't done that, but a lot of people have, and really you can think of your self-esteem as Mark Leary and Roy Baumeister have argued that how your self-esteem fluctuates, sort of your state levels of self-esteem or transient levels of self-esteem. It fluctuates up and down according to how much you feel included. And so when you're feeling rejected, it's going to go down. When you're feeling more included, it's going to go up. And there's a lot of indicators that this happens, both in terms of people, their behavioral responses, but also in terms of their sort of neural responses to rejection. So that's a very good question. So you can think of self-esteem as really an indicator of your how included you feel.
Okay, thank you so much. This question, you may have just answered it within the last question. Let me know. Did you look at a trait versus state rejection frame of mind?
A state versus trait rejection frame of mind. We do look at sort of just general feelings of loneliness, and we find very similar effects with sort of general feelings of loneliness and sort of acute experiences of things that will make you feel lonely. But one thing that we find is that the effects are just a lot stronger when we're looking at sort of state rejection. As you would expect, there's sort of this initial blow of feeling like nobody wants to work with me, people don't want to be around me, I'm going to have a lonely future. Those effects tend to be a lot stronger on things like self-regulation and aggressive behavior compared to, just generally, how left out do you feel? So we have looked at both, and they do, I think they originate from the same thing of having a thwarted need to belong, but one just seems to be a little bit more powerful than the other.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Does your work account for the differences between introverts and extroverts?
Yeah, so really, what we find is that both introverts and extroverts hate being rejected. We don't find that it's stronger for one than the other. So it kind of hurts the same for both.
Okay, thank you. Next question, have you applied any of this research to children?
Yeah, it depends on how you define children. So right now we're looking at sort of early adolescence, and how they respond to rejection and feelings of isolation. And we're following, like college or high school freshmen over the course of their 4 years of high school. And, we're trying to look and see, what are some things that are going to, how we can, number one, identify the students who are getting left out, how we can target interventions to help them, and also to see just how these things develop over time. So if I'm getting left out quite a bit, if I'm sort of at the fringes of my social network during my freshman year, do I find other people to connect with? Because we've shown over and over again, we and others, that rejected people are so motivated to reconnect with other people that one thing that we're trying to do now is to see if that motivation will drive people who are left out now to sort of form their own social networks. And I think anecdotally you see signs of that, right? But that's one thing that we're looking at with younger folks, sort of early adolescents.
Okay, thank you. We have so many people are so interested in your studies. We have tons of questions still.
Oh, great! I love questions.
Yeah, I know you're doing such a great job answering them.
I try.
What do you think about studies that show that social rejection is just more salient?
That social rejection is just more salient. I'm not sure I understand. Like, more salient than what? Do you think maybe the person could clarify that?
Okay. I'll wait for her to come on chat to clarify that, but we could maybe move on to the next question.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that I didn't answer that one well.
No problem. She's saying to look at the next question.
Okay.
Hold on a second. I see. Okay, her next question, and I guess it maybe encompassed this question. What do you think about studies that criticize the similarities between the neural regions associated with social pain and physical pain by saying that those regions may be unspecific to pain?
Well, I welcome people to have these sorts of discussions, and I think that for example, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex does a lot of things. It helps us monitor things in our environment, seek out discrepancies in our environment, and so yes, I completely agree that these regions that we're that we're talking about here, that they do a lot of different things. They are involved in physical pain, but they're also involved in doing other sorts of things. But I think one thing that we have shown though is that the manipulations that we use are targeted to physical pain. So when I'm numbing you to physical pain, and it's showing reduced activation in these specific regions and not other regions, it gives me more confidence that what I'm showing relates to a reduction of of a pain process. Keeping in mind that that region also does other things, but I think that's a very good point, and it's one thing that I think it's sort of motivating us to look at more, sort of at a more nuanced perspective on what these regions are actually doing and what the rejection experience actually is. So yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up.
Thanks. How does the act of being the rejector change a person?
Yeah, that's great. What a great question. If this is true, that there is this overlap between social and physical pain, then what it suggests is that, by being the rejector, that it will change people in the same way that, doling out physical pain changes people. And there hasn't been a ton of evidence or research that's looked at this. But the research that has looked at it has suggested, profoundly negative consequences that accompany rejecting people. So people become less social. They become less interested in interacting with other people socially after they reject people compared to when they don't reject people, for example. And so the question is, how does that change a person? I guess it depends on how you define change. Does it make people less social? At least temporarily it does. Does it make them more callous and unemotional to other people's suffering? Does it reduce their empathy? Does it compromise people's relationships? So if I spend, if my job description is rejecting people every single day, is that going to compromise my own relationships? It might, but we don't know. But what we do know is that, that rejection does hurt, that it's not a metaphor, and that by inflicting hurt on other people, that you may show similar effects that people show when they're inflicting harm on other people in physical ways. But we really, that's really more speculation than fact at this point.
Okay, perfect. Did any aspects of the research identify individuals who had experienced violence or abuse as a child?
We didn't. No, we haven't looked at that. There's so many research questions, but we haven't looked at sort of childhood adversity or neglect, either as as a predictor, as a proxy for rejection, or as a moderator of these effects.
Okay, thank you. Were the participants screened for depression or anxiety?
We've screened in a couple different ways. One thing that we do is we screen people so that if they're currently in psychotherapy, that they're not being exposed to these rejection manipulations. But we've also measured participants' levels, in a subclinical way of things like depressive symptoms and socially anxious symptoms. And we've shown that depressed people do tend to show these effects stronger, and socially anxious people do as well. So that's a very, very good point, and it's related to especially with the anxiety component, with Geraldine Downey's work on rejection sensitivity, and how people who are highly rejection sensitive, they are sort of navigating their environment, anxiously expecting rejection, and when it comes, they kind of overreact. So yeah.
Okay, one more question before we conclude. Does the binary of accepted or rejected depend on the interpretation, internal self-talk, and evaluation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in these, the answer is it can, and it often does. But in these studies, we left it, in most of the studies, the experiments, we wanted to create a situation where it was pretty unambiguous, that you're getting left out of this game, and that's pretty unambiguous, or these people really do not want to work with you, so that we kind of left the doubt out. But yeah, it's one thing that you find is, and that we and others have found, like with cyberball, sometimes people do wonder. They say, what did I do? And so they're trying to. They know that they've been excluded. Like there's no ambiguity there, but the cause is what people are interested in. And people wonder all sorts of things about was I throwing the ball too hard, too fast, all these sorts of things. But in terms of explaining these effects, when we're measuring feelings of loneliness and exclusion, that's a possibility. But in our manipulations, we try to keep it pretty unambiguous.
Okay, thank you so much, Nathan. Thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you for your wonderful questions. I just need to show something on my screen. Hold on one second. I'm going to take back presentership. On your screen, you should see a message about CE credits. If you don't see it, look at the bottom of your screen. There should be a green and blue ball-looking icon, and that should bring the WebEx player back up. So thanks so much for joining. As many of you might know, Worth Publishers is now approved by the American Psychological Association to sponsor continuing education for psychologists. I'm going to, after the session, I'll send you a link to the quiz that you need to take in order to get your CE credit certificate. It's going to ask for a code. The code is right here. It's N as in Nathan, D as in DeWall, D as in December, 03. That's the code that will be asked for on the quiz. Nathan is the new co-author on David Meyer's introductory psychology textbooks. There is no other obvious conflict of interest in today's presentation. For more information on the CE credits, you can email me at amacinio@worthpub.com. If you didn't get that whole long email, that's okay. You could either reply to any emails you got from us previously, or you could wait till I email you with the quiz information. Thank you again for joining. The recording and all materials for this symposium will be archived on Faculty Lounge. If you go to this link, you can see all of the symposia that we've held over the past year. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you again, Dr. DeWall. This was an amazing talk, and I really appreciate the time you took with us today.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.